Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Rutherford Cable's Book Club, presented by the Community Engagement Committee. I'm Gina Urban, Community Engagement Chair. I'll be joined by Janet Kincherlow-Martin and Cheryl Chestnut as we offer questions to our special guest, Dr. Rhea Seddon. Francella Salas will be monitoring our chat. Our meeting will end promptly at 1. We ask that you please be sure you are muted. We welcome your questions. For the author to submit a question, please use the chat and direct your question to Francella Salas. We'll be pausing several times throughout the presentation to take your questions, and we'll do our best to get to all of them. Before we get started, those of you who don't have your cameras on, would you mind putting your camera on for long enough for us to take a screenshot that we can use for our Rutherford Cable social media? I appreciate that. Okay, do we have everybody? Okay, smile everybody. Francella, take our picture.
Hey, cheese. I got it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, we are so pleased to have Dr. Rhea Seddon with us today. She is one of the first women and one of a few select on our planet to have been to space. She spent 19 years with NASA and logged 30 days in orbit on 3 space shuttle missions. She herself said when her first flight was extended by a day, who in the world would pass up an opportunity for another day in space? Clearly, she loved what she was doing, but it took so much work to get there. Dr. Seddon faced many obstacles, not just by virtue of gender, but also because of her petite size. And at one point said, I learned that dogged persistence can often overcome many shortcomings. Her book, Go for Orbit, was the Benjamin Franklin Award Gold winner from the Independent Book Publishers Association, one of the highest national honors for independent publishers. Let's give a hearty Zoom welcome to Dr. Rhea Seddon. We are so happy to have you with us today, and let me start by asking, what was your favorite thing about being in the space program, and what do you miss most? What did you miss most after you left?
I think it was, what I enjoyed most was being able to fly, being weightless, but being able to accomplish the things that we set out to accomplish. My background was in life sciences, and 2 of my 3 flights were all life sciences, and we were studying human adaptation to space so people could stay in space longer. And so we learned a lot about keeping people healthy, and of course now they're staying up for a year. So that was very important groundwork that we set. What I miss most is the camaraderie of a fairly small group. In the astronaut office, we might have, I think, maximum maybe 60 people. And you got really close to people because we all got assigned to different tasks. And so we would be working with one person at one time and then another group another time. And we just formed a camaraderie that is tough. We still have astronaut reunions and we get to see each other as we age, but it's good. I mean, we still love each other, and that's an important thing. And, those of you who you've had a group like that, a church group or a school group or whatever, you know what I mean. They've got your back, you've got theirs, you follow their lives along. And, luckily I have a couple of groups like that here in Murfreesboro, Charity Circle group. But that one's gotten so large, it's hard to form a small group with that. But I have a couple of others that are smaller, and, we just follow each other's lives along and support each other. And that's a wonderful thing to have. I'm sure all of you have that sort of thing in your life too.
Wonderful, wonderful. When you began pursuing your dream of becoming one of the country's first female astronauts, did you have any idea of the incredible impact this would make for women in other non-traditional professions? I wonder what advice you would offer today to women, particularly younger women who may be pursuing similar aspirations.
Well, you know, I learned pretty quickly that you had to fit in. You know, obviously, when I came to the space program in 1978, there were 35 people in my class and only 6 women. And then we joined the astronaut corps, which was all men. And, you know, we were being watched to see whether that was going to work. There were a lot of people who thought, older astronauts who thought, that's never going to work. They're never going to fit in. You know, they've got backgrounds, they're not pilots. But, you know, we learned early, if we wanted to be a part of this group, we had to fit in. We had to work hard. We probably had to work harder than some of the other people that were coming in with us. And we had to have you have to have a sense of humor. You know, they were always making little side remarks or kind of jokes about us, but, you know, we laughed at that. We just joked back with them. So, you know, if you take offense at everything, which I think some women tend to do, they think everything that's said to them or about them is an offense. And that doesn't work very well. You soon become kind of an outlier, an outcast. And, you know, that's one of the things that I had to learn. Luckily, you know, when I married my husband, he's one of the worst about making jokes about people. And there was on occasion I had to tell him that wasn't appropriate, that wasn't funny. And he says, oh, I didn't understand that. So, you know, when you end up with a group like that, you do have to prove yourself. You have to fit in. You have to, you know, take things with a grain of salt sometimes. And sometimes you have to stand up for yourself.
Right, right. You say in your book's foreword that with help from Stu Ross at Southeast Business Forums and from Epiphany Creative Services, you became a brand. You built the book and the marketing plan. Can you talk about how you did this and what you think played the biggest part in achieving your brand?
Well, you know, I had lots of things in my background, but I had never really done any writing. When I went to NASA, people told me you have to keep a journal. You have to write all this down because it's going to be really important. I just couldn't make myself do it. But as I began to end my stay at NASA, I realized that I had been part of a very unique time. And so I started writing everything down. I would sit in the carpool lane when I was waiting for my kids, and I just spew forth. And that's what I had to do. Just write it down. You know, I'm not going to go back and edit it. I'm not going to look and see, you know, if the timing was correct or check the facts. I'm just going to spew forth. I ended up with 13 full legal pads and had no idea what I was going to do with them. And Stu Ross was someone who ran a networking group. And for some reason, he got my name and said, would you come talk to our group about networking? And I was kind of at the point where, oh, I'll just go talk to anybody that invites me. And this was a nice group, and they all had very different backgrounds. And at the end, I took questions and answers. And I told them about my career and what I had done, what it had taught me. And one of the fellows in the audience raised his hand and said, have you ever thought about writing a book? Well, I had the book. And I said, well, yes, I have the book mostly written, but I don't know what to do with it. And Stu Ross, who was leading this meeting, afterwards said, I think I know somebody who could help you. And that's how I was introduced to Stephanie Huffman at Epiphany Creative Services. And, you know, it's just serendipitous things happen in your life. I mean, how did that ever happen? But Stephanie, you know, met with me and she said, no, here is the way we approach writing a book. First, you have to have an idea. And I looked at her and I said, Stephanie, I have the book. And she was taken aback. How do I start in the middle? But, you know, with her help and the help of her company and all her connections, we were able to pull that off. And I made the decision to self-publish the book. I don't know if any of you have published before, but the route that most people take is you find an agent and a publisher, and the publisher buys the rights to your book, and then they can print as many of those books as they want. If they don't sell, they quit printing them, and you have no rights to your book. So that didn't sound like what I wanted. So I funded the entire thing of my book. So I'm happy about that because it's my book. I can print as many as I want. I can do whatever I want with it. And that's the way I approached it. There are lots of ways you can write smaller books nowadays. Stephanie talks to groups about, we can put together, a paperback book for you, a small book for your family. There's lots of ways you can do that. But taking on the writing of a book is a big job. Will the people whose faces I see raise their hands if they've written a book of any size or length? Gina, you
Oh,
have?
written. Oh, I thought you said read. I thought you were asking if we'd read your book. I certainly hope everybody has. Do we have anyone who's written a book?
Well, I would encourage. Pardon? Well, I would encourage you to write something. If it's just sitting down and writing something out on the computer, or just, getting a notebook and you say, oh, today I remember, what my father told me about the war. Gina, did your father tell you anything about Patton's Army?
Oh my goodness, he did. And in fact, when he retired from the business he owned in 1985, he told a long story about an experience he had in Patton's Army.
Yes.
So yes.
My father was in too. And towards the end of his life, as he was getting older, he did some handwritten things. And he would tell me stories. And at the time, I thought, I don't really want to listen to, this, that, and the other. And I sort of remembered words and towns in France and things like that. And then he wrote things down. I went back and looked at Patton's drive through Europe. And I remembered the names of places that he had told me about. And I'm blessed to have some of those things that he happened to write down. It's not very much. I have some things written by relatives of mine about coming to Tennessee and things like that. So I keep them all in a box, and I don't know if any of the kids in my family will ever be interested in them, but they're kept for them. I had my younger son ask me one time, he said, St. Patrick's Day is coming up. Do we have any Irish blood? And I looked back in that box that's labeled Roots and traced one leg of my family back to Ireland. And I told him, Dan, yes, you can celebrate. And he said, hurrah. So he now has a drink or two on St. Patrick's Day and wears the green. So, I think different kids take a different interest in it. My older daughter and my younger son are interested. And I think they're the only two that have read the book. But it's here for the others when someday they say, what was that? I remember part of that happening, but what was that? And the book is on the shelf and they all have copies. So important to leave something for your kids, your experiences or what it was like when they were born, or, the tough times that you all had to go through. Everybody has stories like that. And, if you'll just take a little bit of time to jot it all down and throw it in a box, jot it all down, throw it in a box, someday it will be important to somebody.
Okay. My goodness. All right. Well, that gives us all an assignment, I think. Thank you. I'll turn the program over to Janet for a few questions.
Thank you, Dr. Seddon. What lessons can we learn from the challenges you faced as you and others in your astronaut class persisted in diversifying the astronaut corps? And how can we apply these lessons to what many still face in the workplace today?
Well, I think it is, it's somewhat easier in the workplace today, but that inclusivity, we have to remember that. We're becoming a more diverse group of people, whether it's here in this town or in this nation. And I think that, as I say, you have to work hard to get into places, and then you have to do a good job once you get there. And I think that young people need to learn those lessons, and somebody needs to tell those lessons to them. There have to be people in their lives, either in schools or in clubs or in different kinds of gathering, that will encourage them. I think one of the things that young people, especially young women, they don't think they're capable. And we need to give them the opportunity in school to be capable, to learn how to attack a problem, how they can get to know other people, not be afraid to go talk to people. I've talked to lots of schools and young women's groups and things like that. And, Sally Ride had a saying, if you can see one, you can be one. I think people think of people who have important backgrounds like I did, that we're somehow different, that we're stuck up, we don't want to talk to them. And I think that if they look at people like us who go out and we're standing around just chatting like everybody else, they say, oh, maybe I could do that. And so I think that's important for all of us women who have careers and who have done things in life, different things. You have to get out and talk to young people, especially girls, but to school groups and scout troops and things like that, which I try to do a good bit.
Thank you. You mentioned a little earlier that you remain in touch with a lot of the astronauts that you worked with in the past. What changes have happened for women in the program because of women like you who were first to challenge the status quo of the protocol?
Well, I think that, pardon? Anyway, I think that now that there are significantly more women with very differing personalities and backgrounds and things that they're capable of doing, their specialties, that there are more women who realize that you don't have to be a pilot, you don't have to be an engineer, you can be a geologist, or you can be an oceanographer. I have a friend who, I've been sort of mentoring, I guess, who's applying for some programs with NASA. And I think her background is in microbiology. And she said, does that relate to anything at NASA? I said, well, yeah, because we're concerned about the stuff that grows on the wall in our space vehicles and how we keep it clean. And, it never occurred to her that might be something that would be good on her resume. And of course, she has a lot of piloting experience in small planes. So, she's trying to fluff up her resume as much as she can, not fluff it up, but to make it look really good. But I think other women have to prove, to get into something like NASA and the space program, that they do something other than live in an ivory tower. That was one of the things that we looked at when we did selection board. I was on the selection board for astronaut classes. There were a lot of people who were brilliant scientists or brilliant physicians or surgeons. They had never done anything much. They had never, parachuted out of an airplane. They had never climbed mountains. They had never, like me, they had never gotten their pilot's license or done any small plane flying. They didn't have any risk taking in their backgrounds. And I think that that's something that I think helps you feel better about yourself when you think, I did that. I can do that. I never thought I would. And so I think that a certain amount of risk taking is important, not only in your career, but in your life.
Yeah. After your second flight in the early 90s, you said that you said you asked for and were given your dream job of being a capsule communicator or Capcom. There's no better way to be in the thick of things than to be a Capcom. Why do you think that you were selected for that role?
Partially because I asked for it. And sometimes that's what you have to do when there's somebody up above you that's assigning jobs. And there's one you especially want. You have to go make your case. And I'd had enough experience in a number of different things. But after my first flight, I realized that I didn't really communicate with the ground when I was in flight. And I didn't, I had a little trouble understanding what they wanted me to do when they they called up and told me to do something. I realized that I was deficient in that skill. And so I asked, could I be a Capcom? And a Capcom sits in mission control. They're the one person in mission control that talks to the astronauts. And so you have to listen to what they say. You have to know quickly what the answer is. You have to know who to ask. And it's a kind of a daunting job, but it made it so much easier for my second and third flights to know how to communicate crisply, unequivocally, how to say what you want to say in as few words as possible, and how to listen to what comes back up for you, because it's when you're many miles in space, it's not like talking to somebody face to face. You're just listening and you're trying to figure out what is it that they want me to do, or what didn't I do, or whatever. And that back and forth conversation, I think was a real learning experience for me, and I was delighted to have that job for a while.
So don't be afraid to take a risk and take a challenge.
True. Well said. Well said.
Okay, I think we're going to turn over to Fran now to see if we've got any questions in the chat box. Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Not a lot of questions, a little bit more like little infos. Jennifer Phillips is writing a book, like Amazing Lash. Is that correct? Is it? And Megan recommended one idea to set up an email for your children and send them picture stories and other things throughout their life, so that when they are aged, to be able to look at their emails, they can go back and see everything that you had sent them. Elaine stated that both her mothers had written memoirs, so her sons provided them with voice recorders to encourage them to do the same. That's a good idea. I like that.
Yes.
And then Deborah also recommended that she did a Mother's Legacy book for her daughters last year and gave it to them for Christmas. It was a great way to document my life, as well as a family memories and pictures, etc. They really appreciate to take the time to complete it for them, which that's an awesome idea to do too.
Mm-hmm.
And then, here we go. Amelia, what are your thoughts on space flights such as with SpaceX and Virgin Galactic?
Well, I kind of feel like the more the merrier as we get into flying in space. If people have a good idea, a new technology, it works. NASA obviously has sort of outsourced some of this, but if you look back on the early days of the aviation world, we had government sponsored things and we had private companies, and they worked hand in hand. They learned from each other, and I think that's what we're going to learn now with having commercial space opportunities. People have great ideas. They can do things cheaper. They can do things better. NASA doesn't have to get funding from Congress to do all of this. If they can instead hire somebody like SpaceX to take their people up there, that's great. And I think that that's the way it's going to be. And hopefully all of the people who have new ideas will make sure that it's always as safe as NASA made it. They would always say NASA has, triple redundancy on all its systems. You have a main system, a backup, and a backup to the backup, and that's really expensive to put all of that in. That's true. But we've managed to stay pretty safe with all of that. So I think that we have to look at all these new folks that are coming in and make sure that they don't mess up. Nothing's worse than to lose people or lose a vehicle, because that brings things to a halt, as it did the Challenger accident and the Columbia accident. things stop and people begin to question, should we be doing this? And I think we have to look at the commercial side just a little bit differently.
All right, I'm going to pick up with the questions now, Fran, unless there are more. Are we good?
I actually have a question myself. How were you able to balance work life with, especially with kids? Nowadays we have everything going on, and I, want to see how you were able to balance everything.
I'll give you 2 words. Joanne Powell. She came to live with us to be the nanny, to help out at my house, get my kids to school, get supper ready. She stayed with us for 25 years. So, I think that if you're just totally overwhelmed, you have to get help of some sort. Whether it's ordering prepared meals that come frozen or finding good after school programs or whatever. But, having that all work frequently more than 1 or 2 people can handle. So I think you have to find those resources and do what you can. And, some of those things in my life were pretty expensive, but my kids were important enough to me that, we'll make sure that they get good after school programs. I have a grandson now who, we have him in an after school program so that my daughter can work full time. So, we have to find ways to do that. And women are figuring out all kinds of good ways to do that. It's kind of sad now that women who want to work sometimes, when we had the virus, weren't able to work, and they were at home. And I'm sure that they learned things as I did when I had to manage everything before Joanne came. It takes a lot. It takes a lot, but if you want children, that's what you're going to have to deal with. It was funny when I announced the astronaut program that I was pregnant. I mean, there were 6 women in the astronaut program. One of them had kids, but she wasn't really anxious to talk about kids. But I had some women engineers at NASA who came down and just told me some tips, like, here's the best place to get maternity clothes. Here's the best place to hire a babysitter. And I was just kind of overwhelmed because I didn't really know them well, but they took it upon themselves to gently help me out. And I think that's what you also have to do when you're seeing somebody that's just swamped. I had a neighbor that volunteered. I had a 7:30 meeting. We had a girl that came in at 8 when my first child was a baby. She would get her kids off to school. She'd come to my house, but she couldn't get there till 8. And I had a 7:30 meeting. I mean, for my first flight, the head of the flight, the fellow that was telling us all what to do, the commander, said, we're going to have a 7:30 meeting every Monday morning, before our 8 o'clock astronaut meeting. I thought, what am I going to do? I had a neighbor that came over, and I said, Luann, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm trying to figure out, how do I find a babysitter from 7:30 to 8 a.m. every week? She says, I'll do it. And I thought, oh my goodness, really? She'd had 4 kids and, she was at home. She volunteered to do it. So sometimes people will pop up like that, it's kind of unbelievable that they're willing to help you, but you have to ask and you have to help them in return. And I think all of us do that. We're good people, right?
There's one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Jolene states that it was a very well-written book and she really enjoyed it. Her question is, did anyone in your family follow your footsteps?
No. I do have one son who has managed in kind of a strange way to combine my husband's background in aviation and mine in medicine. He dispatches airplanes at the Nashville airport for a private company that transports organs for transplant. So he asks my husband, you know, should the pilots be flying in this kind of condition, yada, yada, yada. He asked me, why, when we shipped these kidneys to Omaha, did the doctors turn them down? And I said, well, you know, like, read some of the stuff that's in the record. And, you know, it's just strange, but my son, Dan, who, my second child, third child, he was my first child was inherited when I married my husband's stepdaughter. But Dan enjoys being able to run things by the both of us because he's now in a world where he has to know a lot of things in the medical world and especially in the aviation world. So I couldn't talk any of them into really becoming pilots or astronauts or anything like that. They have their own lives, their own careers, and I just want to encourage them to do what they're good at, what they enjoy doing.
All right. Is that it, Fran? Ready? All right.
That is it. Yes.
Well, Ray, I want to thank you just for the pleasure and experience of reading your book. I've since started following NASA, and I have never been interested really before. And my grandson and I have great conversations now. I think he's really impressed.
Yeah.
But
How old is he? How old is he?
Oh, he is 8.
Needs to go to space camp.
He does. Yes, you're right. He does need to do that. He's become very interested.
Sorry,
I do want to ask,
interrupted you.
after you had been in the space program for some time, you said you wanted to get management experience. And what made you want that when you had done so many other things successfully? And then what management experience did being a Bubba, the technical assistant to the director, offer you that you had been seeking?
Well, that was interesting. If you read the book, I think I put it in there that an astronaut every year was assigned to the head of flight crew operations to give sort of the astronaut perspective on things, or to go back to the office and you know, be a liaison. It was called the Bubba. And you know, if you got the job as the Bubba, you got to see how things were run. And I never had any experience like that. And so I was brave enough to ask, can I go be the Bubba? And I was told, not the Bubba, but you can be the Bubette. So for a year, I, you know, worked in the management office with the head of flight crew operations and got to see how all of that was put together, how compromise was made, how they made decisions about launch windows and launch schedules and stuff like that. It was excellent for me to see how somebody runs an organization. And the head of flight crew operations had a big organization to take care of all the astronauts and the crew trainers and a lot of different people, life sciences. So I knew that I was probably not going to be an astronaut into my old age. And I wanted to learn a little bit more about managing a group of people. So I was fortunate enough to, I was brave enough to ask for the job. No women had ever had it. And it turned out to be a little weird because the Bubette got pregnant during that time and was waddling around at 9 months pregnant when she had to give up the job. So it was different, but it worked quite well. And I learned a great deal from it. And it's benefited me as I've moved on into other parts of my career.
Well, thank you. And you've taught us 2 great lessons about asking, right? Taking the risk and asking for a job. You referred, the next question actually refers to a statement that you just made that you said you knew there were some things that you discovered about how to improve an organization that might be helpful in the medical world. I wondered if you might give us an example of something you learned that helped you later.
Well, actually, when I left NASA, I went to work at Vanderbilt, the medical center in Nashville, and luckily the chief medical officer offered me the position of assistant chief medical officer. And I asked him, well, what does that entail? And he says, well, I think I want you to work on like safety. Well, that's kind of a big thing. And so what we ended up with deciding was that I would work on process improvement, because we were doing that all the time at NASA. How can we improve the process that, the checklist that we are reading, the process by which we get a shuttle ready to fly? So I was working on a number of those kinds of projects, and I thought, well, maybe I can work on improving the processes at Vanderbilt. And in doing so, we ended up hiring a company that wanted to work on safety. So the processes to keep our patients safe was very important, and ended up being a part of a spin-off company. And we did that, but it was one of those things that everybody appreciated, and I knew a little bit about, learned a lot about, and that was a great experience for me to be able to morph into a different job after I left NASA. And I think all of us sometimes, well, not all of us, but all of us all of the time have to be looking out for, well, what's next and what can I do, and what are the skills that I've learned that I can apply to something a little bit different or something of the same kind but larger. So I think that's was important for me.
That's great. And what a positive impact you had in doing that then. Safety is a great concern. You said you wanted your next boss to be a good boss when you left, and that you'd had the opportunity to work for and observe many bosses. What would you tell people entering the workforce to look for in a good boss?
Well, there's lots of things to look for in a good boss. I think, first of all, do you fit the job well? Does the boss think it's something that you can do, that you will make a contribution if you do that job? If the boss can explain the job well for you? If the boss, talks to you like a real person, is not highfalutin and, standoffish. Certainly a boss can show you what you would be doing, tell you what you would be doing and where. I'd had good bosses and not so good bosses. And I think after you've had a boss or two, you recognize that, this worked, this didn't work, I didn't like that, it was impersonal, I was doing work that was menial, I could do better, and was never allowed to rise above where I was. You just have to have a feel for that. A lot of people are shy about asking questions, but I think there are a lot of ways nowadays that you can look up, what do I put on my resume and what do I do when I go for the interview? It's very important. I remember, again, the selection process for NASA. People would come in, would be 20 or 30 of them, and they would have an interview. And sometimes they asked the right questions, and sometimes they didn't. And you could figure out, which ones they don't understand and they want something that we can't give them. And I think, having people ask what the job entails, and getting a feel for the boss and the other people that work there are the most important things when you look for a new job.
Well, thank you. Do you mentor anyone today in the program? You mentioned mentoring. I can see how it would be valuable to any woman in the program, or not.
I don't do any mentoring right now. In fact, I don't know many of the new women astronauts, just have not been in that world. The only mentoring I do is I speak to girls groups and remind them that, it's a big world out there, and don't shortchange yourself, and be willing to work hard again and fit in. And, whether it's in a woman's business or in a business with all kinds of people, the diversity, I do talk to women's groups and Girl Scout groups and things like that, and really use my story to show that you can be born in a small town like Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and you can reach for the stars, and you can be a success. And again, if you can see one, you can be one. If they look at me and they think, well, if she can do it, I can do it. I've sent a good message.
Well, that's great. Thank you. We're going to turn it back over to Francella, who's monitoring other questions from the group. Fran?
Yes. Amelia asked, in your book, you mentioned that you had wondered what life post NASA would be like. How is it compared to what you expected and it might be?
Yeah. NASA was kind of, I guess, I did a residency, so I had a real job. But NASA was a different kind of organization. There was a hierarchy, and, you had job titles and things like that. So my NASA job was my first real job. Phrase the question again for me specifically.
That you wondered, well, okay. You had wondered what life post NASA would be like. How has it compared to what you had expected? So like you thought it was going to be one way, but how was it afterwards? Like in reality, like after NASA? That's how.
The medical world was really different. The NASA folks were all, most of them were military backgrounds, and were very precise. And, if somebody said the meeting is at 8 a.m., everybody would be there at 8 a.m. And so they really took things seriously. And of course, they were military. They knew they could, lose their rank or, not be promoted. The medical world was very different. The doctors, well, I might come to the meeting, I might not, it was just not as crisp. And again, doctors were making mistakes because they were being sloppy about things. And it was very hard to get them to change their way of thinking and their patterns. If we said, we are finding that people, when they go to the operating room, sometimes there are mistakes that are made. We tried to talk the doctors and eventually got them to do a checklist before their case. Do we have the right patient? Are we doing the right procedure? That sort of thing. And so trying to make the medical world into the military world, we eventually got a lot of things done, but it was a surprise to me when I morphed from one world into the next to see the very difference. And I think anybody who's sort of gone from one profession or one kind of job to another kind of job, there are good things and there are bad things. That when you get there, you think, oh, well, this is a whole lot better than what it was over there. But you say, this is not working as well as it should, I wonder. That's when you need to wonder, can I be of some help to help work this out so it's better? So that's what I tried to do. Took what I learned at NASA and tried to apply it in the medical world.
All right, we have another question from Dina. What is your favorite piece of advice that you give your students when you are talking to a K to 12 classes?
The K part of it's difficult, but I've spoken, to second graders, and of course they want to know, I take pictures of what it's like to sleep in space and how do you go to the bathroom in space, and they want to know some of the basic stuff. And as they get older and they've been able to read some books or, they've watched some space flights or they've taken an interest in it, their questions get to be a bit better in K through 12. Certainly the older ones, the high schools, they come prepared. When I talk to the really younger groups, I don't let them just raise their hand and ask a question because it gets kind of off the wall and I can't understand them. So I have the teacher collect the questions and then sort of edit them and then pick the best ones, and then hand it back to the student and have them read their question. So, you have to realize different age groups are coming from different places. I find that there's a difference sometimes in schools. Schools prepare the students. Astronaut is coming. We need to talk a little bit about it. Others, they look at me and I introduce myself as an astronaut. I make story flights on the space shuttle. They'll raise their hand and they say, "Did you fly in space?" Yeah, I did. So I've sort of learned how best to talk. I found that the younger grades like pictures. My husband does an interesting thing. My husband had to learn Russian for his last flight. He was going to fly with a couple of Russians, and the Russians didn't speak English. So he had to learn some Russian, bless his heart. He was able to do that. And what he does when he goes and talks to the young kids, he said, "Would you like for me to write your name in Russian?" It's the Cyrillic alphabet. And he tries to spell it out as best as he can. And the kids just love taking home a card that has their name spelled out in Russian. So, each of us learns how to entertain and inform and educate the age group that we're talking to. And I think whenever you go talk, you have to understand where the audience is coming from. That's one of the things that I talk about. I think Gina had asked me some questions about leadership. You have to learn the group that you're leading. You have to focus on them. Being a surgeon in the OR and leading that group is different than leading the kindergartners out the door. So, who are you leading? How do you do it best for that kind of group? And that's something that I've had to learn how to do. And I think, Gina, you asked me about the ATHENA principles. And of course, I was nominated and became an ATHENA person. I've forgotten what the head person is. Tell me, Ellen.
Recipient.
You're ATHENA Award recipient.
Yes, award recipient. And the principles talk about, authentic self, relationships, giving back, collaboration, courageous acts, learning, fierce advocacy, and celebration and joy. Well, I had to pick one of those to write my essay for the ATHENA Award on, and I wrote mine on giving back. But in the essay, I was able to pull different parts of my life into what led me to be able to give back. And I sort of related it all to the giving back, because I was at that point in my life where I had done a lot of different things, but I had not given back as much as I wanted to. And I got more involved after that in some of the charity organizations and events, because I realized I had been given much and I had to give back. So for those of you who are involved in ATHENA, it was wonderful for me to think a little bit about that.
Wonderful. And you just took my next question, which was about the ATHENA principles, which is great. Fran, do you have anything else from?
I do. I've got two comments. One was from Elaine. She stated that
Ellen, not Elaine.
Sorry,
Ellen.
Ellen.
Thank you.
Ellen, I have known you for years, right? But I had no idea about the extensiveness of your NASA involvement, almost 20 years. I learned so much from your book about you and about NASA. Thank you. And then Ashley had stated that she really enjoyed reading your book and hearing you speak. I'm having to jump off early, but it was amazing reading your story and recognizing the places you were talking about, like Country Club, where we hold our monthly cable meetings. I have one more question. This is coming from Cheryl. I heard a past interview on NPR with former astronaut Michael Collins, who lost his battle to cancer this week. And he said sometimes he walks alone at night on the farm and looks in the sky at the stars and the moon and has to remind himself that I was there. Do you have those moments when you place yourself back there?
I do. For me, I remember the work, the people, the launch, the landing, and everything. But I think the thing that I remember most was looking back at Earth, because it was just spectacular. You know, you went around the Earth every 90 minutes and got to see a different swath of the world. And, you know, it's spectacular. My favorite picture is one of the Sinai Peninsula. It was daylight and it was beautiful. I think it's in the book, but it was a Bible story. You know, it was where the Pharaoh was and where Moses and the people roamed, and then the Promised Land is over on the right-hand side of the picture. So remembering those things, and every once in a while, in the past, when I went and spoke someplace, I would try to find a picture of their part of the world, you know, whether if it was in California, there's nice pictures of the California coast. I tried very, very hard on my 3 flights to get a good picture of Tennessee. And I looked at it, some of the pictures from higher up and you know, from down here, really, not from space, because there were no good pictures of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. But I knew that if I could find the squiggly Columbia, what's the river in Nashville? Anyway, I knew
The Cumberland River.
Cumberland. I knew that I would be close to that. And so if I started taking pictures, click, 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 as we covered that. And when I came back, I had a lot of pictures of green trees. I eventually blew one of the pictures up and I could see the dual highways from Murfreesboro to Nashville, and I could pick out the Smyrna airport. But they were so small that, you know, when you blew it up, you really couldn't tell. So I tried really hard, but I was never able to. There were some places that were gorgeous to take pictures of. My husband showed or got a picture of one and only picture of Paris with a nice lens on the camera and a clear day. But you don't get to do that very often. You have to wait for just the right moment. So looking at the Earth and thinking about the fact that we are this tiny blue marble in space, and we're it. Everybody is here. We're all together, and until we find some extraterrestrials, this planet's all we've got, and the people in it are who's going to be here for a while. So, you know, that for me was the most memorable sort of thing for my days in space.
Thank you, Fran. Ray, as we wrap up today, let's end on a lighter note, and let me ask you, if your book were made into a movie, whom would you cast to play you?
I've had the opportunity to think about that. Maybe Reese Witherspoon.
Ooh, good choice. And also, she's at least a Tennessean now, right?
You might have the right accent, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, fabulous. And she's blonde. I mean, you know, why not? I think that is a great choice. Well,
and there may be a movie about our group at some point in time, so be watching.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, listen, as you said in your foreword, when the historian Doris Kearns Goodwin tells you, oh, you must write your story, then you must. And you've written a wonderful story, and we have all enjoyed reading it and so appreciate your being with us today. Thank you so much.
We have one question down here, I think.
Okay.
Yep. One more question from Ellen. I noticed credit was given to NASA for most of your photos. Was it difficult getting permission to use those photos?
No, it was difficult sometimes to find the photos, but I have a wonderful friend who's in the history department at the Johnson Space Center who was able to find things, but I didn't think of that. And someone reminded me, if it's a NASA photo, it has to say NASA photo on it. So I had to go back and do that. But yeah, you know, it was a learning experience in many different ways.
Wonderful. Anybody else? Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for being so engaged. Thank you for your fabulous questions. And thank you, Dr. Rhea Seddon, for being with us today.
Thank you, Gina, and thanks to all of you.
I wish everybody a great afternoon. Thanks so much.